Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another gripping episode of the IMCX podcast. I am your host for the day, Roger Nicholas, Director of Customer Experience at Island Analytics and Marketing. And we are getting in deeper into the science of sales and advocacy. Today's topic is going to focus on business outcomes. So it's part two of the science of sales, and we're going to focus on the business impact of reducing hidden barriers to performance. And so we have a really exciting guest here. We have two guests today, so it's going to be very, very cool. But before I get into who our guests are, again, just want to welcome you back and remind you that the core of everything we do here at Island Analytics and Marketing is based on behavioral science. In customer experience, behavioral science tells us what customers are about to do, what they want, and how to design our processes to meet their needs, as well as those needs of our employees. Well, when it comes to business development and sales, behavioral science has a lot to say. And our guests today are both a behavioral scientist as well as a sales training practitioner who specializes in behavioral science training. Our first guest is Maynard Warren, who has over 28 years in sales, training, and coaching. He has a large client base across Canada, providing them with sales and management, recruiting, talent assessment services. Maynard Warren and Associates is recognized as one of the nation's foremost experts in sales call reluctance training and increasing salesperson productivity. He's the creator of the Prospecting to the Top training program, and Maynard Warren is recognized as one of the nation's foremost experts in executive access training for sales professionals. Maynard has more than 20 years traveling throughout the country, teaching professionals in all fields how to overcome the emotional barriers that often keep them from reaching their goals and success that they dream of having. Maynard coaches and counsels companies not only to increase salesperson productivity, but also in the assessment, selection, and retention process. So that's our special guest speaker today. Our co-host, you may have met and remember her from our last episode of the IMCX podcast. For over 20 years, Ms. Tralitha Bryant has served as a theoretical and applied research analyst at Behavioral Sciences Research Press. She's completed an extensive volume of research projects and constructed hundreds of statistical models associated with the influence of impaired social contact initiation, or what they call sales call reluctance. And that's based on clientele building activity. At present, Ms. Bryant directs the world's largest database on sales call reluctance, and she's also one of the principal co-developers of BSRP's flagship assessment, the SPQ FSA, something that Maynard uses quite a lot, and he's going to share some about that. Ms. Bryant also developed the predictive algorithms for actionable reports that are used by organizations globally in 45 different countries to forecast probable levels of sales performance. And during her tenure, Ms. Bryant has presented numerous research studies at the Southwestern Psychological Association and the Society for Industrial and Organizational Psychology. And Ms. Bryant has also been a keynote speaker for the Society of Applied Multivariate Research, and she has presented BSRP research at numerous management level training events in the US, Europe, and Australia. Please give a warm, powerful IMCX welcome to our guests, Maynard Warren and Tralitha Bryant. All right, so let's dive in, because this is the business outcome episode of the science of sales. So Maynard, this first question is going to go to you.
Okay.
You've served many industries with sales training and coaching, including cable companies and telecom and banks and insurance and investment companies, as well as even payroll management companies. With all the different options to offer in sales training, what attracted you most to the science of call reluctance?
Very good question. Thank you for that question. Well, you can teach corporations do a fair to reasonable, maybe even a great job of providing training to their sales personnel, typically. And that training covers knowledge and skills, but that's not where behavior resonates from. Behavior,
Mm,
effective salesperson behavior resonates from these emotional barriers or lack of these emotional barriers, which, behavioral sciences have put in their body of work called the psychology of sales call reluctance. And
mhm.
it's so exciting to have the opportunity to work with salespeople to help them on that journey to remove all these emotional barriers.
Mm,
Because in most cases, if not all, these emotional barriers have been learned. Thus, they can
okay.
be unlearned.
Right.
And that's the journey that we take salespeople on, is the journey to become, to cleanse their minds, to become fearless. And it's so interesting to me, at least, when folks remove these emotional barriers and they're no longer taking space in their sales brains,
Mhm, mhm.
those emotional barriers are replaced by creativity.
Mm.
And
Mm,
that creativity is all about, as a salesperson, how can I better communicate my value proposition? How can I
mm,
have more impact in my marketplace? How can I reach some of these folks that in the past I thought were virtually impossible to reach out to? So as
mm.
folks remove those emotional barriers, it's replaced with this wonderful creativity, and people can be their awesome selves that they've been programmed to be, but they've had these emotional hiccups.
Right.
That's what we specialize in.
Wow. Okay. I can feel your passion, Maynard, and that's why I wanted to have you as a guest, because I know passion touches our audience.
Oh yes.
Trulitha, I wanted to ask you, just for our audience understanding, could you briefly explain to our audience what exactly is the science of call reluctance?
Yes, call reluctance refers to that tendency to avoid opportunities that we have to engage with people we don't know or with people we do to promote something that's important to us. And that
Mm,
something could be a product or a service, it could be a proposal. You could be writing a grant and you're seeking funding. You
mm,
could be engaged in fundraising. All of these activities require us to engage in social contact with others.
mhm.
And taking that first step is a barrier for many of us. And
Okay.
the thing about car reluctance is it's more than one thing. When we think of this fear or this inhibition to begin communications with others, we think, oh, fear is just this one thing. But our research for the past 40 years has indicated there are different forms of fear. And some behaviors that we engage in, we don't even recognize it as a fear-based behaviors. But if
Mm,
it's a fear-based behavior, that means we're engaging in escaping and avoiding opportunities to engage with others. And we are convincing ourselves it's the right thing to do, even though it obstructs our ability to reach goals that are important to us. So, car reluctance, as Maynard indicated, it's typically something that we have learned to do and we've become comfortable at it. But it's
mm.
an emotional uneasiness that we feel when we have to step out, take that first step, and engage with other people to promote something or to advocate for something that's meaningful to us.
Wow.
Mhm.
You alluded to 40 years of research on call reluctance, Trulitha. How many types of call reluctance are there? And are there some popular ones amongst salespeople?
Yes, when we first began to pursue this area of research, we began by looking at, well, what does the psychological literature discuss? What have they discovered and documented in regards to fear? And
Mhm,
what we found were really literary terms, are very descriptive, such as shyness and timidity. So that's where we started. But the more we researched, we realized those terms were just too broad. If
mhm,
if fear is something, that people can describe, then it's something that can be measured. And we began that process. And originally, we uncovered 9 forms of car reluctance. Further research, we uncovered 12.
Mm.
As of to date, we've uncovered 16.
Oh,
And
okay.
by far, Roger, the most common form of car reluctance is what's called yielder car reluctance. And
Okay.
that's when we convince ourselves, you know what, I don't need to initiate contact with this person, because if I do, I'll come across as being too pushy or too
Mm.
intrusive. So we're always waiting for the right time to engage with others. And for a lot of folks, that right time never comes around.
Right. Maynard, you could probably speak to that, right?
Well, we have the honor of working with a number of companies within North America, and what Tralitha just mentioned, Yielder, uh, when any organization engages with us and they begin having their sales folks and their sales managers complete the SPQ FSA, we typically find somewhere between, on average, between 40 to 50% of those sales groups have way too much of what Tralitha just mentioned, this yielder tendency, which is the fear of being thought of as too pushy, too forward, and too intrusive. And where it really resonates is when a salesperson, they initiate that first contact, but then their yielder takes over and it keeps them from following up in the appropriate manner. And just to illustrate this, let's say that there's a salesperson that makes a prospecting call on a Monday to whomever. Let's say it's someone high up in an organization as CFO.
Mm-hmm.
They leave a voicemail on Monday and the person doesn't return their call. Then that salesperson thinks about calling them on Tuesday, but in a nanosecond, their yielder takes over and they say, whoa, I can't call them. It's only Tuesday. They haven't had enough time to listen to my voicemail from the previous day. Now it's Wednesday and they come up with another yielder excuse. Well, it's only been 2 days. I don't want to be that pushy sales guy, so I'm not going to call back on Wednesday. So ultimately, let's say they wait until the following Monday to initiate their second contact. Think of all the things that have happened in that prospect's world in that 1 week.
Yes.
It's almost like you're starting your prospecting efforts from scratch all over again.
Yep.
That's a horrible way to prospect. And yet, that's what yielders think is the quote unquote right way to prospect.
Ooh. Okay, this is becoming church right now. Wow. You just touched on some sensitive points there for a whole lot of people who are listening and watching this podcast.
Oh yeah.
Wow. So okay, I wanna start. We're gonna dive into some of the business outcomes pretty soon. All right. But can you tell our audience, Maynard, when it comes to the recruitment or talent assessment of salespeople, how have you found core reluctance most helpful to your clients?
Thank you for the very good question. The clients we have that use the SPQ FSA in their assessment and selection process do it because they're looking for something that can predict whether this person that's being interviewed as a candidate for this commission sales position, who's doing their best job of putting their best foot forward, they're smiling, they're saying all the right things, but the hiring manager uses the SPQ to help them come up with a great predictive tool of, if this person comes on board with us, will they prospect enough to reach their sales goals? And it's almost that simple, because the SPQ FSA, even though it has numerous different crucial measurements about this candidate that a company's looking at hiring for the commission sales position, when you boil it all down, Roger, it's, will this person put enough energy into being visible in the marketplace to have enough sales appointments to create enough sales opportunities, make enough sales to reach their sales goals. And that's what the SPQ FSA that answers that question magnificently.
Mm. Wow. Okay. Okay. So Tralitha, let me then flip this to you. Is there science behind those outcomes that Maynard describes? And what makes we kind of touched on this before, but what makes core reluctance training so different? But could you add any value to that, Tralitha?
Yes, there is a great deal of science behind that, because when we look at the sales process, that process begins, and I believe there's a slide that's available for that. When we look at the sales process, we look at it in functional or behavioral terms. What is it that salespeople are required to do? And the
Mm.
important thing is, since we service a worldwide market, the sales process is something that generalizes to any sales organization, regardless of the industry we're speaking of. And so when we look at the process, the very first requirement for salespeople is to initiate contact. And that's what we've
Mhm.
been talking about here. But a key thing to understand about this is that we've taken this very first step and we've looked at it in depth. It's not just a first step where we just describe it. It's something that we have measured high, very significantly. And that is how
Okay.
we have determined that there are different forms of fear that prevent us from taking this first step. So once the first contact is made, then the second step is to introduce yourself and your company. If it's a client you've already worked with before, you introduce the reason for why you're making this call. Perhaps there's a
Mm.
new application, a new product or service that can better
Mm.
meet their needs. And then the second step is to engage in an informed discussion with them, where you're understanding more about what their needs are, how their needs might have changed, and how you can best answer those needs to be of service to them. And the final step is to influence them to actually
Mhm.
invest in your products or services so that their needs are met. Now, our training focuses on this first critical step. Now, once this step is done, once a person initiates contact, then the other steps become just as critical, if not more important. But that first step has to be made. And when we look at sales training programs, when we look at a lot of personality assessments, those things focus on those steps 2 through 4, the introduce, inform, and influence. And again,
Right.
that becomes critical. But that type of training in itself is no substitute for making first contact. And when you look at and unpack a lot of the sales training that's available on the marketplace, it will deal with things such as how to negotiate better, how to improve your listening skills, how
Mhm.
to answer forms of
Questions.
rejection that might occur during the sales process. And
Mhm.
all of these forms of training actually assume you already have someone you're talking to at the moment. So we just focus on that first step and we call it the missing link, because it tends to be assumed that, well, if a person is trained on how to sell, if they're motivated, if they're goal focused, they're going to make contact. And that's an
Mm.
assumption you just can't make. And it's
Right.
not that in situations that people don't make contact, but it's doing it consistently. So our training is helping people to make that contact consistently and do it in a way that they're emotionally neutral and they don't feel this unease or this discomfort, because that takes energy away when you've got to
Yeah.
devote energy to coping with having to make contact as opposed to actually making contact. And we want folks to redirect their energy towards their goals instead of towards dealing with the fear that they're feeling and so forth.
You know, that does I really like that explanation, Trulitha, because that does a good job of explaining what Maynard was describing about people who have what are known as yielder tendencies. Because in that scenario, um, their fear of re-engaging, like seeming like they're too pushy, really derails their ability to generate the type of income or attainment that they want for themselves and their career or their business. So I could see that. And then something Maynard said really is kind of scary, is that he's found in his experience so far that 40 to 50% of the salespeople that he's interacted with usually have these yielder tendencies, which means there's a whole lot of people out there delaying their goals, delaying their goal attainment, delaying revenue for the company. I wanted to throw this kind of organic question at both of you. There are some industries that you don't necessarily have to go prospect, but they may already have a database that you have to go visit. You have to, like the pharmaceutical industry or even the banking industry. You have a captive database that you need to build relationships with and try to expand their share of wallet. How do you see this adding value in that type of space? Either one of you could take that question if you like.
Go for it, Trulitha.
Well, yes, you can provide individuals with a territory to work. You can provide them with a list of customers to call or even existing customers to call. And with the training, you can give them scripts. And having all of these tools and having all of the support is very important. But it doesn't necessarily deal with that emotional barrier of being uncomfortable doing it. And that's one reason we say, I believe there's a slide that refers to this. There is a big difference between what we know and even the support we have to use what we know. It's a difference between that and what you actually do. And that
Right.
gap represents call reluctance. That energy loss is due to fear. So having all of this support, and it's important to have that support, having a customer base to call and a customer base that needs your services is one thing, but fear causes us to act against our best interest and against the best interests of those that we serve. And you just can't ignore the influence of fear and just tell people, just do it. Just do it doesn't work all the time because
Yeah.
our minds are telling us, you know what, you're not ready. Sometimes you have that. Another form of fear that we've recognized is when you feel uncomfortable even being in a sales role and you don't mind making friends with people, but when it comes time to actually engage in promoting something, advocating for something, no, it's easier to just take an order and fulfill orders that the customer gives you than to actually go out and generate those orders yourself. Even though you know what your sales goals are, you know what your sales quota is, it doesn't matter. Fear Fear is at that emotional level, and it's much stronger than our cognitive level that tells us, okay, I've got the training, I've got the knowledge. Fear trumps our cognitive abilities, and it causes us to act in ways that are goal obstructive instead of goal supportive. And the more fear that we experience, the wider that gap is between what we know and what we do.
Wow. Wow. Well illustrated. Great point. Wow. Okay. Okay. I hope our listeners are taking notes because we are here to help you hit your goal attainment and help your company grow. All right. Either through customer experience or through understanding call reluctance. So Maynard, I want to dive into the business outcome side because that's why people are here. They want to see, okay, yes, we hear about the science, and yes, it sounds cool, and yeah, you look good on actually add money to my pocket. Does this actually grow revenue for my business? So Maynard, tell me, without compromising any proprietary info, of course, can you give any examples of what challenges you might have seen, let's say, for instance, with the financial services industry? And what did you do with with the core reluctance training to help address it? And then what were some of the business outcomes after the training?
I can give you many. Let me start with one because it's on the top of my mind, and I'm very proud to have been part of this process. There were 3 sales teams for a large Fortune 20 company based in New Jersey.
Okay.
That's a telecommunications company, so
Okay.
technology company. They had 3 of their sales teams participate in the training in October. So the October,
Okay.
beginning of the fourth quarter. So the first
Okay.
thing they were able to track was the number of appointments that their 3 sales teams achieved. And they used as a baseline the third quarter, which would have been, what is that, July, August, and September, versus they received the training in October. So now they had October and November and December. So they had the pre and the post. And the first thing we were able to measure were appointments with decision makers. Well, the appointments with decision makers went up 83%. All right. That's flabbergasting to me.
Yeah.
Because here's a group, and I want to just for anybody watching this, because this still flabbergasts me. Here's a group of 20 salespeople, these 3 sales teams, 20 salespeople who in the third quarter thought they were doing their job to the best of their ability. Go through this training. And oh, by the way, we do follow up as well. So we stick with them because, it takes 21 to 32 days to change a behavior. We're talking about changing some pretty important behaviors. So we stick with folks for minimum 4 to 8 weeks. So they increase their appointments 83%. And then in the first quarter, which just concluded the month of March, we're in the second quarter now, of course. In the first quarter, their sales had grown by 195%.
I'm sorry. Wait. Say that again for people in the back who didn't.
Their sales had grown by 195%. So again, just for all of this, let's just think about the magnitude of this. Here's a group that going through September of last year thought they were doing their job to the best of their ability. And by the way, this company has an award-winning training department. They are putting training out there on knowledge and skills that'll knock your socks off. It's great. They don't deal with this what we're talking about, though, which is the true source of sales behavior, which is summoning up all of that energy that Tralitha was alluding to, summoning up that energy and putting it toward goal supportive behaviors, revenue generating activities. So 83% increase in appointments, 195% increase in sales. All right, that's a technology company. Financial services company that we're working with to this day. In fact, I've got a workshop with them on Wednesday and Thursday of this week. 3 weeks from now, I'm flying to Toronto to do another workshop for them. What they found just in one of the offices that we worked with 2 months ago, their business has grown by 60%. Okay, well, that's just one office. But with that being the case, we've been working with this company now for 10 months. And the folks that have gone through, their financial advisors who have gone through this training have reported on average an increase of 30 to 35% in their commissions.
Wow.
These emotional barriers, the thing that I think we need to make sure people that are watching this podcast understand is that these emotional hesitations and tendencies and predispositions, they control behavior. And when you can get somebody on the journey to cleansing their mind of this head trash, all of a sudden their awesomeness finally appears, maybe for the first time in their career, and they're able to do the things intellectually and logically that they've known that they could have done
Hmm.
but they had all these obstacles, at least on their thought processes of why they couldn't or shouldn't do those things up until the time they received this training. It's very
You
exciting.
know,
It blows my mind.
it's exciting. It's incredibly exciting, Maynard. And what I'm hearing, what keeps pounding on my head is emotional tendencies are expensive. Because if I can improve my ability, my commissions by in excess of 15% within a quarter, that's a huge 15% is a huge jump in one quarter. But you're talking about 30%
Agreed.
for advisors.
Agreed.
That's huge.
Indeed. And what we're looking at here in the blue line that's shown, that represents it represents two sales teams that went through corrective training. They went through the training for call reluctance to help them overcome those barriers we have to being visible
Mhm.
in the marketplace. Those are the folks in blue. The red line represents actually 15 different offices that did not go through training. And you'll see there's two vertical lines on this chart. That first vertical line represents the time when the workshop took place. So prior to training, there's not much difference between these two groups. But after
Mhm.
training, you start to see a wide disparity between the amount of outbound calls these two teams are making. By far, the team that went through training has a much significantly higher level of outbound calls that they're making, because these
Mhm.
people are now changing their feelings from being fearful to changing those feelings to more, this is the success that I can enjoy. This is the
Mhm.
freedom from fear that I can experience when I deal with these emotional barriers. That
Mhm.
second vertical line that's shown is actually when COVID hit and we all went into a shutdown mode. And you
Mhm.
will notice that even during the pandemic, those folks who had learned to minimize the influence of car reluctance were still producing. You see a little bit of a dip there, but then it goes up, it increases. Whereas those who had no training, you see they still are producing at a lower level. And here's the key thing about this graphic. Those folks who were producing at a lower level, they had the same ability as those folks who went through training and learned how to overcome their car reluctance. The difference was just the car reluctance training. It made a huge difference. And at the end here, this was altogether, it's an 8-week period that's represented here. The folks who went through training actually increased their amount of outbound calls by 106%. And folks, that's not uncommon. When you remove fear, as Maynard indicated earlier, your level of creativity can increase. Your level
Mhm.
of confidence can increase. You can redefine what success means for you when you can overcome fear. And those folks not only increased their amount of outbound activities, but they also were producing at 69% more than what their colleagues were doing who had not received the training. So, needless to say, this was very important to the organization, and it emphasized the importance of car reluctance training and the importance more specifically of just reducing fear, because now these folks are much more visible in the marketplace. And we know that if you can predict the amount of outbound calls you can make, you can
Mhm.
predict the amount of sales revenue that you can generate. And a
Mhm.
good example of that is that there's another follow-up slide that we have here where we look at those folks who are making more contact. In this case, this is a real estate industry, and it's showing the amount of average monthly commissions that these individuals earn. what we did in this study was to categorize the group in terms of the lower 50th percentile of folks who had car reluctance and the upper 50th percentile of folks who were struggling with car reluctance. Those with less car reluctance were producing or receiving over $12,000 in monthly commissions. Compared to those who were struggling with car reluctance, they had only earned little over $8,000 in commissions on an average monthly basis. And that
Wow.
difference is an increase of 50%, a little bit over. When you look at this on an annual basis, those folks with less car reluctance were generating over $53,000 in average commissions. And this is average commissions for the year, not top line revenue for the company, but just commissions only for that individual. And this type of success helps to increase our confidence and our ability to continue at this level. What we also have found in this study and in others is that when you can overcome car reluctance, the increase in return on investment more than covers the cost of training. And that success actually continues because it's harder to go back to where you were once you realize what you're capable of doing, when you can deal with those emotional barriers that just attack us, regardless of what our goals are.
That's incredible. And this lines up perfectly with Maynard's example as well. I mean, 95%, was it 195% increase in calls and
correct,
and 60% in commissions? It's
yes, in both those two separate accounts, yes.
Wow.
Because Trulitha just commented on once people realize what they're capable of of doing, what the sense they get of what they're capable of doing after going through this training. And that's one of the reasons that we don't want to. Let me back up a little bit. One of the things we do is in the follow-ups that we do, Roger, is we do a goal setting. We do a goal setting program in one of the follow-ups. It's homework between sessions 2 and 3 in our follow-ups. But the reason we wait a couple of weeks after the training to do goal setting with folks is we want them to start understanding what they're capable of for a few weeks before they sit down and set goals, if that makes sense. We want them to start to understand what they're capable of, how awesome they feel they can truly be. Now let's sit down and set some goals after you've got this newfound awareness of exactly how awesome you are. So I know that's getting us in the weeds a little bit, but I wanted to share that because of what Trulitha said, as far as people finally do start to understand what their capabilities are.
Yeah, I mean, but it's incredibly important. So I'm really happy that you amplified that. And again, what I keep getting from this, and I think our audience should get as well, is that call reluctance training for your sales team is an amplifier or an activator or a spark to a team that's already been well trained, because all the training investments you've made already before are not going to be replaced by call reluctance. It simply is going to amplify what you're doing. It's like in the Caribbean, if we're cooking and we add a little pepper sauce to our food, that amplifies what we're trying to accomplish when it comes to taste buds. Call reluctance training is going to season your sales training or whatever training you've done before, so that your team can perform at a much, much higher level and execute and use the training that you've already invested in. So I really like that point. So
well said. Very well said.
Yeah, appreciate that. So I guess I want to touch on, before we wrap up, I want to touch on sales coaching, because I think there are people on here, either as salespeople themselves or sales managers, who are interested in figuring out, well, okay, let's say I identify what my types or reluctance are, and how to address it. How does that help a coaching manager or sales manager, Maynard? And as a matter of fact, both Maynard and Tralitha, feel free to jump in on that one. How have you seen it work, Maynard? And then Tralitha, I guess you could tell us about the science behind it as well.
Well, when you've got someone who's well trained, at the end of the day,
Mm-hmm.
there's only one of 4 excuses of why they're not a top producer. One or more of 4 excuses. And they're all measured by the SPQ FSA. The first excuse is, yeah, I'm too busy with all these other projects today. I'll double up on my prospecting tomorrow. That's called prospecting goal diffusion. It's important for the manager to understand if one of his or her team members is suffering from that. The second one is, I just don't feel good today. I'm sure I'll feel better tomorrow, so I'll do more prospecting tomorrow. That's lack of prospecting motivation. Pretty important for a manager to understand that about his or her, one of their sales team members. Third excuse is, you know, I really don't need to make prospecting calls today. I'm doing pretty well this month. I think I can just wait until later in the week to make those contacts. That's lack of clearly focused prospecting goal level. Pretty important for the manager to understand that. And then the fourth one, and primarily the reason we're here, is I want to make those calls today, Roger. I know I need to, but I just can't right now. And whatever comes out of that salesperson's mouth after they say, but I just can't right now, because that's going to be their particular type of debilitating sales call reluctance excuse, of which there are 16 types. But at the end of the day, for a manager to understand, for someone who's not a top level producer, for a manager to understand, it's only one or more of 4 core reasons why this person has assimilated to becoming mediocre, or they're really struggling. And once that manager understands what's been holding that salesperson back, then they're so easy to coach, because now you're coaching the root cause. You're not coaching you're coaching to the root cause of, why has this person become mediocre, or why are they struggling? And it's only one or more of 4 reasons.
Wow. So you're saying this will resonate in a big way with the audience. You're saying that for a sales coach or sales manager, this will help. This tool, the SPQ FSA, is going to help them identify specifically for each salesperson on their team that they're mentoring, what are the specific hindrances to their performance, and then help them overcome that. That's what I'm hearing. Is that correct?
That is 100% correct.
That is awesome. Tralitha, can you add anything to that? Because that's a powerful statement Maynard just made there.
Yes, it is. And you know, when I think about call reluctance coaching, if you can visualize just a sheet of paper smooth, no wrinkles in it whatsoever, that sort of represent what call reluctance is like, when fear can just operate within us without any intervention whatsoever. But when you go through training, it's like you take that sheet of paper, that smooth paper, and you crumple it up, and it's filled with wrinkles now. When you go through training, that's when you begin to challenge that fear, and you don't let it have a free rein to operate within your thinking, and consequently within how you feel, and then how you behave. Now, when you look at that wrinkled piece of paper, you'll know you can't straighten it back out again. It's not going to go back to that smooth sheet of paper that it used to be, because now you've challenged fear, and you've experienced what it's like when you can engage with others and not deal with those fear-based barriers in your mind that really control how you feel and how you act. So that's the importance of training and coaching. And when you experience that success, you generally don't go back to the way that you were, because you've learned a new confidence and you've experienced a new level of success that you didn't realize before. And it's amazing what that can do to propel you forward, not only in your professional life, but also in your
Yes.
personal life as well. The
Mhm,
comfort with
mhm.
engaging others in communication also can affect us on a personal level.
Okay, so I'm trying not to say that this tool could be used for bringing couples together, because there's some people who lack the confidence of speaking to partners they'd like to partner with, but I'll say that for another podcast. This is
Mhm.
amazing stuff, Tralitha and Maynard. This is, and I hope our audience sees the value that we're bringing here. So I want to wrap up with one more question, and that you can both jump in on it however you see fit. What do you think are the most compelling reasons for a salesperson or a sales manager to buy into or lean into core reluctance training?
I'll cite an example real quick. Is one of the 16 types is referral aversion. Referral
Ooh.
aversion is a salesperson, Roger, who has a hesitation to go back to their client base to get referred leads. Well,
Mm.
here's what we know. When you get a referred lead, there's a 50% chance, even if you do it as a neophyte, you're just learning how to ask for referrals.
Mhm.
When you get referred leads, 50% of them on average turn into appointments. Now, if you
Mhm.
really know how to execute on getting referred leads, you can up that percentage to 90%. The
Mm.
typical the typical cold calling percentage is 5%. All right.
Ooh.
So I don't know about you, but if I'm a salesperson on commission, I want to play in the ball field where we're comfortably and effectively getting referred leads, right? It's kind of a
Yep.
no-brainer. With that
Yes.
being said, again, I'm going to use this number of 40% of commission salespeople in North America that I've had the experience of taking the SPQ FSA have referral aversion. Roger, what does that mean? It means they're intimidated and ill at ease thinking about going back to their client base for the purposes of securing referred leads. So,
Wow.
I mean, and think about the numbers here. 5% from cold calling, typically effectiveness, 50
Mm.
to 90% effectiveness with getting referred leads. So if I'm a sales manager, I would want to know that specifically about my sales team, because
Mhm.
when you're over on the sales side in an organization, it's all about what have you done for me lately?
Lately.
Not
That's
last
right.
year. What are you doing for me right now? If that
Yep.
makes sense. So if I'm a sales
That's
manager, I want to know about that. That can make such a quick transformation in a sales team, Roger. The
Mhm.
understanding what the sales brains that their people have specifically, there's 16 types of sales call reluctance, but this one that I've just spent a few minutes elaborating on is typically the most costly, and that's called referral aversion. And if I'm a sales manager, I probably want to know that about my people.
Oh, that's an awesome one, Maynard. And before you say something, before you add to that, Tralitha, in customer experience, Maynard, you may not know, but that particular gap is a real issue for businesses. And what I mean by that is they have not designed a process that attracts customers to the level of loyalty where they want to give referrals. And so because of that gap, their ability to grow their business at low cost for new customer acquisition is compromised. So even on the scale of big business, um, not being referral aversion is a problem. And so it's good that we can help the individual with referral aversion as well as the business with referral aversion. So now, Tralitha, anything to add to close out before we say goodbye to everyone?
Well, first, I want to just thank you for having both of us on today. And I just want to piggyback off of what Maynard just discussed with referral aversion. When
Mm-hmm.
you have salespeople struggling with call reluctance, for example, referral aversion, it is impacting their business outcomes. And when that
Mm.
fear continues to go unnoticed, untreated, without it's not being assessed, you actually have salespeople that begin to doubt themselves and whether or not
Mhm.
they're in the right career. And you will notice as car reluctance increases, or if it just continues over time, you will begin to notice a turnover rate within your sales team. And it's
Mm.
unfortunate because these are people who could actually sell if they had the training. But we see this turnover rate in not only new salespeople, but you will see it in veteran salespeople. You just can't
Mm.
assume that they're comfortable either. So dealing with car reluctance can help you minimize your turnover rate. And we know companies may invest quite a bit of money and resources in their training efforts. And this is to help the individual, not just the organization in terms of your revenue. This helps the
Mhm.
individual as well.
That's powerful. And customer experience also has some research on the cost of replacing people. People making 75,000 or more, it costs about 40% of their income, their annual income, to replace them. That's before benefits. That's before the training that's invested in them. So just
Wow.
when you factor that into what you just said, Tralitha, there's absolutely all kinds of reasons why our audience would be chasing us down at Island Analytics and Marketing to get core reluctance training done at your business. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to say a warm thank you to Ms. Tralitha Brand and Mr. Maynard Warren,
Thank you.
sharing their insights, their experience, and the science behind science behind sales and core reluctance. For our audience, you can go to our website at www.islandanalytics.com and complete a core reluctance EKG. It's like a real quick assessment to give you an idea of what some of your tendencies might be when it comes to core reluctance. And then we can help you identify how deep the rabbit hole goes and what corrective action needs to be taken.
Yep.
I also want to recommend that you get a copy of Tralitha's book, Relentless: The Science of Barrier Busting Sales. Tralitha Brand co-writes or co-authors this with Suzanne Dudley. You definitely want to own this. It's very helpful to help you understand everything about core reluctance, some things about yourself as a salesperson or your organization, and even some generic corrective actions you might be able to take in order to address those concerns. So again, thank you so much for joining us on the IMCX podcast. I am Roger Nicholas, Director of Island Analytics and Marketing Customer Experience Division. We thank you so much and have a great day, and go win.